Hi, this is Joe Hage. I have the privilege of leading your medical devices group, which, as of this recording, has 317,000 members worldwide. And for those of you who have attended one of our UDI webinars, you'll know the next part where I give credit to our growth partially to Mr. Gary Sainer. This is our 8th webinar on this topic because of the number of questions and the demand for this topic. Class 2 devices need to be UDI compliant in 76 business days. Ready yet? Then put your hands together. Mr. Gary Sainer.
Well, thanks, Joe. That's quite the introduction, and we'll do our best to cover some topics this morning and or this afternoon, as you may be in different time zones, and then we'll see about how we can take this period of time and learn how to go through the requirements and have everyone in compliance by the 24th of September. So what we'll do is walk through some slides today. I will mention right up front that there'll be some homework slides, meaning they're there for your reference, and you can look at them in a little bit more detail later on. Joe makes these presentations available through his website, and that way we can concentrate on some of the high-level critical things that need to be done and have suitable amount of time for question and answer at the end. So I'm going to start to advance the slides. First slide here that you see is entitled Help, How Can I Complete UDI by September? And that's the topic that we want to try to address today. So Joe, are you able to confirm that we're on slide 2 now in the agenda?
You are confirmed. Okay.
So there's a couple things that we need to cover in the beginning just to set the groundwork. We'll take a very quick recap of what the regulation says about various classes. Then we will spend the majority of the presentation on the various steps to walk through for you to complete your compliance by September. We'll reserve a little bit of time just to talk about our solution here at ReadTech and how you may want to consider that to help meet the compliance deadline. And then the balance of the time will be Q&A, where Joe and I will interact and put those Q&A questions out for us to talk about. So let's get rolling. You probably, if you're in attendance, you're probably aware of the FDA UDI Regulation, published in 2013, September 24. And just to recap, there's a couple major sections of that particular regulation. First one has to do with the actual label itself. So this has to do with product identification. And the FDA created an object called a UDI, and we'll talk about that throughout this session. That's a unique device identifier for the particular product, composed of two components, a device identifier and a production identifier. The device identifier actually identifies the labeler, the company, and also the product and down to the version level. And then as appropriate, the production identifier is added on. So that includes serial numbers, batch numbers, expiration dates, and so on. But the basic takeaway here is that UDI needs to appear on the device, label, and also in packaging in two different formats, a human readable format and also in what is typically fleshing out to be a barcode format, referred to as an automatic ID and data capture, AIDC type of format. And then the final rule also addressed the dates that appear on the label, as shown on the screen there, year, dash, month, dash, day. There is a subsection of products that are used multiple times. So for single use, you obviously need to put that label in place that we just talked about. But for those products that are used multiple times and reprocessed between patients, there are some additional levels of identification referred to as direct marking that the FDA wants to have you apply to your product. The second major area, well, technically the third one here on the screen, has to do with reporting this device identifier, this product identification to the FDA. They are keeping a database with this information, as well as a number of attributes, and we'll spend some time talking about that particular process. And don't forget, there is another tenet here of this particular regulation referred to as reporting. And this particular section covers various places where UDI shows up in your annual reports, your design history records, complaints, your medical device reporting, any recalls that may be involved, and tracking and so on. So as a particular class of your inventory has UDI on it, then you'll need to include that in your reporting. So what is the impact to industry? So those particular rules and guidelines from the regulation will affect your labeling system, something brand new, UDI submission, and the documentation. So the first and last, labeling systems and documentation, you already have those in place, and UDI will cause a modification to those where you'll need to make accommodations for UDI to be included in a label, for example, or reference in your quality management system or your standard operating procedures or so on. But the middle one is relatively, well, is new and has not been required as previously. So pulling that data together and submitting it to the FDA, reporting to the FDA, is something that we want to talk about. The graphic that's up on the screen shows data on the left-hand side inside your system, and then that top leg with data flowing through a labeling system is what needs to be modified to include UDI, and there's various utilities that you have in place and systems that you for that. We'll talk more about the requirements for that labeling system as we go forward. And then the second data flow, that leg that shows data flowing through a UDI submission system to the FDA, and then ultimately to the National Institutes of Health. The National Library of Medicine puts up a website called Access UDI, where your data records are made public. So this is the critical slide concerning timing. Up to now, Class 3 device manufacturers have submitted their data and made label changes back in 2014, September. And those implants, life-supporting and life-sustaining labelers completed their work in 2015. Right now, we're only 4 months out and actually 76 working days until those Class 2 manufacturers in the audience need to update their labels and also include a data submission to the FDA. And what that means, because of that short time frame, there's a sense of urgency that you'll have to act on. There will be some limits to the options that you have available at this point in time. Some of those solutions may be long-term in setting up and establishing, getting everything up and rolling, and that would cause you to be late and past the compliance deadline. So there are some options, and we'll highlight those ones that look like they're probably out of scope at this point in time as we go through the presentation today. It also may require that the short time frame may cause you to seek additional help, external help, whereas if you had a longer period of time, you might have been able to do this totally inside, but now you may need to look to additional external help so that you can meet the compliance date and avoid any misbranding. What we will do is walk through various steps for you to implement a UDI in a UDI system. First one there is to get a plan together, do the preparation, and then move into a preparation for the UDI submission, actually pull the data together for the UDI, and submit that data. And then we'll talk about rolling into a maintenance ongoing a steady state process where you'll be submitting any changes and rolling products out the door with new label design. So as we walk through these steps, I've identified some subtopics that need to be covered in each step. In this particular one, the first one, UDI prep, has 4 different sub areas, and we'll walk through those in the next few slides. It's very critical that you include multiple departments and multiple team members. So it's very common that the regulatory would take lead in this team, but you'll find that UDI permeates into many different areas of a company. Product design, manufacturing, operations, around the circle there, regulatory, quality, even sales and marketing, and so on. And especially with the collapsed time frame, you want to make sure that you do have representations from each of these departments so that you are not faced with oh, by the way, a few weeks to go before the deadline, and then realize that there's a major hiccup. So include various representatives from these areas inside your company, and it'll help spread the workload around as well. Part of your investigation for that team will be to learn the basics, find out what is required for your particular product. You want to identify your classes and your product codes and so on. I highlighted a couple links here that you might want to go to. These are good introductory links. And at the bottom, because of the time frame, I strongly recommend that as you start to feel overwhelmed, that you quickly refer to industry associations. There's a number of online information and education available. You may want to consider consultants in connecting with vendors. Those people that have done this for the last 2 years are a great resource for you to pose questions to. And rather than figuring out all of this on your own, which is going to extend your implementation time, I would highly suggest you talk to someone that has walked through this already. So after you figure out the requirements for your inventory, next would be to evaluate where you are. So this is commonly referred to as a gap analysis. Look at where your data is residing. Are you currently identifying it in one of the FDA approved agency, like a GS1, a HIPIC, or a ICC BBA standard? If you are, that's great. If not, you need to contact one of those 3 and set up an account and start understanding their protocol for numbering. Look at the various processes that you have in place and what systems that you have in place. Are they going to be compliant and able to handle UDI? There are some external parties that do gap analysis to help you move along, and there will be various comments like that as we work our way through the system today, or through our presentation today, where if you're overwhelmed, low on staff, need to accelerate, we'll try to give places where you can kind of collapse this and spread the work. And then this final step in the preparation would be to get that particular standard in place. So if you are currently not using GS1 or HIPIC, for example, you'll need to map your identifiers over to that new standard and make those process changes, so keep your quality management system up to date. And then secondly, as the final step in this preparation is to revise the actual label itself. So some companies, I will mention here, have taken this event to say, let's go across the board, let's update our labeling system, and then we're thinking of doing this anyway, now's the time. Well, 4 months out from your compliance date, I would suggest that maybe this is not the time to make such a drastic major system change. So one of your options here is to modify your current system in place and being able to talk to someone that is experienced in getting UDI onto your labels. It just complicates matters if you bring a brand new major system in at this point in time. Not to say that it cannot be done. You want to realize that you have a time barrier here and limited resources. And not only your labeling system, but all your other production supporting systems. So your ERP, your master data management system, the supply chain activities, are all of these able to support the new UDI? And just think about that new product identification on your product as it goes out the door. Who sees it? What systems do they have to read it? And think about able to have that identified all the way down to the end user. So the next major step that we'll talk about is looking at the UDI system and doing preparation for that particular system. So,
Hey, Gary.
Sure.
Since we scheduled this to be 90 minutes, I thought maybe I'd interrupt you here and ask some of the questions that have been asked already. Do you think that will work, or do you think we should wait till the end?
So I think it'd be good to do some interaction. We'll just keep in mind the total time. So let's go ahead and hit.
The company realizes it has not published one or several products by mistake. What's going to happen?
Well, they basically calls this scenario a misbranding. So they are extremely cautious, will stop product as soon as possible. Find that the FDA has levied and getting started. I think some type of plan to get that in place in the event the FDA does come on site and want to know what's happening and why these products are not identified. So yeah, Jeff.
There's multiple power cord adapter and powered warming mattress that can be purchased separately or together. Do each of the components need a separate UDI?
So the FDA has addressed this particular scenario then the system needs to have a UDI and all the components fit into that category. From what you read, it's marketed on their own. And that requires that those individual components have their own UDI separate from the system UDI.
Okay, and told me ahead of time with a similar question. She asked if a kit contains three different of the three, is exempt kit be submitted with the direct marking but exempt selected?
So I think what we have seen, the FDA take the most cautious, the most extreme high-risk component. So yes, the over. Another scenario where a kit might have, let's say, one product that needs sterilization. So the FDA again would use that rule of thumb and say, take the worst case component and report the system level kit at, the extreme level.
Okay. The you up, so perhaps we should go back to a regularly scheduled program.
Step in this step that we're about ready to talk about here, Joe, has to do with the preparing the UDI submission system. FDA has established two major avenues to report data into this global unique UDI. And the first one has to do with manual entry. So FDA has a website, and referred to as the UDI web interface, where you can go manually key in your data. Obviously, there's mention. The other option is to submit the data electronically. And that particular form protocol that is XML based and used by the FDA for other data product information and submissions to the agency. So they have leveraged that particular standard that's actually put out by Health, and the very same data, put it into this particular document and send it to the FDA electronically through the electronic submission gateway. This next slide details those two major areas into some descriptions. The first one across the top is the UDI web interface manual entry. The second SPL, as well as the third and fourth avenue. The second one has to do with making use of a hosted piece of that a labeler could transfer data to and have that piece of software manage and store electronically there'll be various rates for editing and so on, and then talked about. The third option available using it, or it also uses SPL, but in this particular model, you're able to submit your structured data, this data that you have to collect in, for all these scenarios, and send that off to an outsourced service and say, I don't have the time, energy, effort at this point in time to take care of that. I would prefer that you handle that. And so this is a service model where that data is handed over to a third party, and they would be able to build the SPL and submit for you. The last one that would be viable, except for this time frame, in my opinion, would be to build your own solution and put it inside your environment, or you may go out and purchase a piece of software, have it installed, do the installation, do the IQ, OQ, PQ, validation on it, and so on, and do the training. It's my of that one at this point in time. You know, yeah, to use that obviously. Decision, it's going to be extremely difficult. I would highly recommend that you pick system players submitting and implants, life-sustaining, life-supporting, and pick a solution that already has a proven track record rather than embarking on something brand new. We won't chart in detail, but you can go back as homework and take a look at some of these characteristics for those various solutions. The four rows identify the FDA UDI web interface, the hosted version, the outsourced on-premises, and again, the note there, time the on-premise install software systems are able to be tiered as far as pricing and capability goes. So I'll just give an example from our particular solution where we offer the hosted software and the outsourced. And some of our clients only have a single record. So it's able to small to large volume submissions. Take a quick. Okay, so you can go back and take a look at those in more detail. And this,
I'd caution that if each of you try to click on them at the same time, I might crash my system. So please do that a little bit, but I know this is a common request, and perhaps it'll answer some of the questions you'd otherwise ask.
good. The slide that we have in front of us now goes through some of the characteristics that you want to evaluate as you pick a solution. Only in that time frame, the expertise and provider that you are various modes of submission. If you're using electronic submission, are they able to there is an FDA requirement for connectivity to your internal systems to share data and make sure that data is synchronized between some legacy data that you have and new UDI systems. We're not going to talk too much today about the international roadmap, but keep in mind that being able to scale up and also go world and various missions consider. And then again, because of time for frame to get information, particular systems targeted and start to work on that. Then the next major step would be to create your FDA accounts. So all labelers that are submitting data would need to create an FDA UDI account, and you need to submit information about your company, and your FDA would respond with credentials, and you're able to go in and start working in a draft mode, and then also submit data or submit it through those people those labelers that are using. Just includes another step of putting a test together for the pre-production submission, and then create, again, with the time. Some vendors will, and you're going electronic or even the FDA account, some systems, some vendors will be able to support you and guide you account. For example, we've done, well, I think as of today, 140 or so of these account setups. So we're well experienced and can help you work your way through setting up accounts. And in regard way you want to look to Joe, we're at another break spot before we see
as before, questions have gotten away from us. We have dozens, and we'll say.
Okay, very good. So I'm going to move into the data set that needs to be submitted to the FDA. There is some common fields. Off the top of my head, I believe it's 12 fields that are shared with the labeling system. So obviously the catalog number, the description, the device identifier, and other bits of information are able to be shared on both the label and the submitted data set. But there's a whole host of other data, and you'll find this data scattered about the enterprise. It could be in multiple file formats, could be in various locations, could even be in a spreadsheet of someone that has left the company. So finding some of this is a little bit of a daunting task, and good reason to start early and to start to ferret out some of these areas, these particular data fields that are tough to come by or that you don't have readily available. The other consideration is to make sure that you have access to some of the agencies that the FDA has pointed to for product identification. The global medical device nomenclature, the GMDN, needs to be identified, or using the FDA alternative. There's something new called the Dun & Bradstreet DUNS number for your company, which you may know. What I'll mention here on this slide is we talked about these tasks of finding data, and you might find that some of the data does not actually appear in electronic form. So an example of such would be a single-use icon on your label that appears and goes out with the product, but it's not electronically held as a digital value that you can use a Boolean true or false and submit it to the FDA. So there's some other considerations as you work your way through collecting this data. The last item on this slide talks about collecting some additional data fields. You might want to do that just for ownership, but I probably would not recommend collecting your international regulatory data at this point in time. There's some time that you want to take in the future to do that, but now is probably not the best time. For your reference, this slide identifies those 55 fields and the 7 additional that the FDA derives from those fields, for a grand total of 62 in the database. And we here at RETEC offer a data template, so whether you use ours or another one, I would highly recommend starting to put this data together in a structured format. Many of these templates and guides allow you to have the FDA regulation guidance available, so it helps you identify what particular value and the format of that value needs to be recorded. I'm going to leave this for a homework slide, where we have found over the 2.5 years of doing this that a number of collection issues occur. This is put together from things that we have seen. It also includes some items that the FDA has identified and shared with industry about their data collection and getting the data in place such that it meets all of the validation issues that the FDA has. We're going to move over to another step of this data processing, where after you've collected the data, there's something called data normalization and validation. And what do I mean by that? Normalize the data, it means to make sure that it fits the FDA's business rules. So one thing to check, for example, is if you're using GS1 to make sure that you have 14 numerical characters, 14 digits, and you have proper dates. There's list of values that need to be observed. For example, you might have centimeter spelled out in your database and used various places, and yet the FDA only accommodates the CM for that particular submission. And there's other examples here, but the bottom line is trying to make sure your data is pristine is absolutely valuable, because you don't waste time making multiple submissions to the FDA and getting iterative feedback. If your system that you have for UDI system is able to do a pre-check against the FDA's business rules, you greatly collapse the iterations that you need to do, and some advanced systems are able to help you along this data transformation, normalization, and validation. Here's some more examples. Again, I'm going to leave this for homework. And the next two slides go into very specific examples that we have seen that cause a particular record not to be accepted by the FDA. So again, homework, homework. Now, next thing we'll do then is to submit the data. So we have put together a submission process for the FDA UDI, and we have collected the data, and now we're ready to submit. So we're working our way across left to right on this workflow, where at this point in time we're ready to use the submission particular method that we picked, whether it's the FDA UDI web interface or using the electronic SPO. Here's some detailed steps and how that is actually done. There's a web interface manual, user manual available, so you can work your way through that and make data submissions through that. For the SPL, which lends itself to an automated electronic, more accurate type of submission, there's some steps there that you would walk through to build that SPL file. And again, your solution should be doing that in the background and then sending that to the FDA, which also accommodates bulk entry for multiple records that need to be submitted. It is important, as this verifies that the data actually did make it to the FDA. So you want to make sure that records are showing up as published, and there's a grace period that we'll talk about. FDA is allotting 30 days grace period where you can make some edits except for the published date field. And after that period, then there's a number of data fields that become fixed. Verifying that verifying that data to the FDA on SPL submissions is a little bit different. There's a XML file called an acknowledgement file that is returned from the FDA. So make sure that your system properly addresses those acknowledgements 1, 2, and 3. There's 3 separate events that are acknowledged by the FDA. Again, I'm going to leave this for homework. These are some lessons learned from submitting well over 140,000 records at this point in time, and you might want to keep this in mind so that you don't fall into that trap and again delay your publication. After the grace period has been completed, those records that you had submitted to the FDA are available on this website. This is a public website, Access UDI. There's 4 or 5 fields that are redacted out, but otherwise it's the data that you submitted and is made available publicly, so you can do some searches and find the data, confirm, and actually you can poke around and see what other companies in your particular sector have submitted. And that is one of the final confirmations that your data has been actually published. Now we're ready to move into production and maintenance. So up to this point, we talked about changing the labeling system, we talked about the UDI system, the data in the submission. All that is a criteria before you actually ship product out the door. So once the public UDI submission, that's the legal time says you are now able to ship product that is properly marked with UDI on the label. And you want to obviously coordinate this event. You can actually ship product families early or in an incremental, phase them in once the submissions are made to the FDA. So there's no reason to wait till your full inventory has been identified at the UDI before you cut over all your products. So this can be a phase. One thing to keep in mind is the timeline for that compliance date. And then, since this is a very young, dynamically changing environment, the FDA changes specs periodically. There will be some data maintenance, and if you have some values that change, the FDA talks about keeping those records up to date. There's system maintenance, and there's knowledge maintenance. So as the FDA rolls out new regulations and guidance, you'll need to keep abreast of those and make changes accordingly. This slide details some of those timing events for label changes. If the value is actually appearing on the label of the product, you'll need to report that to the FDA UDI before you actually ship that change. If there's a value, let's say it's the you added a supplement number to the product. That does not appear on the label, so you have 10 days where you can start shipping products early, but within those 10 days, then you'll need to report that supplement change to the FDA UDI. I'm not going to go into this slide, but again, it's a homework slide. Most important to pick up off this slide is the bottom right panel that lists the various fields that become fixed. So once a particular record passes through this life cycle from unpublished to published in a grace period to then fully published, those 11 fields would cause you to create a brand new device identifier in the new record. So the impact of that is significant, where now your whole identification system needs to be updated for that particular product. So getting these fields correct is one of the prime activities to make sure when you verify and validate your data, as it will not be able to be changed and will cause a new record to be submitted. I would normally talk more about the global impact of UDI and activities that would taking place, but in this 4-month time frame, we're just going to have to put that on the shelf. There is not much consideration. Just to know that there is strong and active efforts being made around the globe in various countries. Regulatory agencies are moving forward with UDI, and there will be implementation timelines for those agencies as well. But it's not in the next 4 months, so we're going to put it back on the shelf. This slide summarizes those steps that we walked through, and I wanted to also show how they might relate in a timeline. In this particular page, we show the UDI plan that needs early, and then immediately launch any UDI labeling system preparation. In parallel, you'll need to start the UDI system preparation, and again, highly value those systems that are already in place and running. Make use of those rather than try to invent something from scratch. And then while you're finalizing that system, you can start collecting data. So that actually will take you a significant amount of time. We see a lot of data prep issues. And then squeeze in that UDI submission near the end. I would target a couple weeks, if possible, before the compliance deadline, so that as you have any delays or problems with particular products, you have a little bit of leeway. And then as soon as that registration and reporting has been done at the FDA UDI and your labeling system is ready, I would cut over to your production system with UDI labels and start shipping products out the door. That can actually occur as soon as your submission has been made to the FDA and your labels are updated. You don't have to wait for the 24th of September. In fact, you obviously want to back off a little bit of that so you have, again, a little bit of leeway. Ideally, you would not interrupt the production flow. There are a couple challenges that I'll quickly highlight. We expect well over 2 times the number of submissions from last year. Last time I did a count earlier this week, I think there's still about 400,000 submissions that are expected to be added. So I think it's going to get rather busy at the FDA, competing with other companies that are asking for help from the FDA help desk. There's certainly a lot more Class 2 manufacturers than in the previous waves. So there's more companies. In many cases, they're smaller staffed. They don't have the background knowledge, so there might be more questions as a result. And help desk, I think, is going to see a significant overload. We also saw the actual data submissions being acknowledged in much delayed fashion. And so what used to be returned in 12 minutes took 3 days we got into that final week, the last few days. So all that to say, start early, start now, and submit as early as you're able to. Joe, I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and just for those people in the audience that would like to evaluate a particular solution, go into a quick description of what we offer, and then we're going to move over to Q&A. Let me quickly talk about the FDA UDI solution. This is our core expertise where we sit between the medical device manufacturer and the FDA and offer a outsource model as well as a software as a service model where data flows into that blue block and electronically flowing data in. We validate all that data to the FDA business rules, keep version control. We have rules available, and then allow a process of approvals to take place, build the SPL, and then automatically submit that to the FDA. So some of those things that we talked about earlier, a vendor having a template for you to work off of, guidance, helping you through questions, helping you through account setup, sharing an electronic submission gateway resource, no need to use your own, and just working your way through this whole process. All those things are part of the offering that we supply. Since we do tier this particular solution to the volume of submissions, I think you'll find it's very cost effective. Most importantly for this discussion today is that it saves time. So within a week you can have a very quick startup and use a well-oiled, proven and compliant system. It's very easy to work with. It's not intrusive into your existing system, and it's flexible with a couple different models of implementation. And basically we help you walk through this scenario and supply support. The last thing I'll mention is because of the years that we've had working with submissions, we have that expertise available for you. And again, I think I had mentioned about over 145,000 submitted records. So this is a well-oiled and experienced solution that you can make yourself a bit, or you can consider. And we compare the number of volumes, or the volume of submissions that we've made to the total GUDID, and it looks roughly about 25% of all the submissions that the FDA has flowed through our system. So it's a very significant major provider of that data. We work with well over 140 customers, again, very small to large, and be glad to talk more. We do make available a RETEC UDI guide, and this is able to guide you along the way. This would be a free download, so you can follow up that particular link. Joe, I think I'm at the end of this presentation as far as the prepared material, and what we would like to then to do is have you take a look at some of the questions and put those forward, and let's take the remaining time to help the audience through the questions they have.
I have to say I'm surprised. I didn't realize you have done 1 in 4 submissions to FDA.
Yeah,
That's shocking.
Yeah, 25% of all the records that are there. So
wow.
I think what that means is a lot of small companies, you make their 1 or 2 submissions, but we have some very large clients that submit high volumes.
Yeah, it's just too much to manage on your own. Okay, well, I have a lot of questions here for you. So Vincent asks, some of our devices are really tiny. They are 2 milliliter vials of reagents. The labels are 1 inch by 1 inch and don't have space for much of anything, especially not a barcode. How do other companies handle this issue?
Yeah, so there is a question about, the product being way too small for the label itself. Some companies have been very creative in attaching a label. So if this is a single-use product, they might put it in a bag and then put the label in the bag, or attach the label with some type of a plastic fastener. If the product needs to be direct marked, meaning it's used after the original packaging is probably dropped by the wayside and discarded, then you have another issue, and that falls into the direct marking. And I don't know if we want to go there right now, but I'll just quickly say there is an exception for the direct marking if the product is too small, or if it would affect the effectiveness or the safety of that product. It would not need to be on there. So there's not a general exclusion that the FDA has for the product being too small, although what we have seen is some companies would write that up in their design history file, and then have that discussion available in the event the FDA questions them for that particular very, very small product.
Gabriel asks, how does all this affect distributors who sell private label products?
So yeah, the FDA has now only addressed the suppliers to the marketplace. So if you are a labeler, or even a relabeler or repackager, you might be a contract manufacturer. All those categories the FDA considers labelers, if you will, and they have the responsibility to label their products. Now, once you get into the supply chain, the FDA has not enforced records of this as of yet. There is some direction from the FDA that this is going to be coming, so that you'll be able to track a particular device all the way through its logistics down to the eventual end user and patient. So might go to a hospital and then a physician uses it on patient X. So that, I think, is coming. Right now, the regulation only applies to identifying the product as it's released into commercially available into the marketplace.
Okay, and Matt, I think this answers your question too, what he just said. If our company reprocesses other companies' medical devices, are we responsible for labeling even though we're not the OEM.
Yes. In that case, if you reprocess the product, you would need to put your own label on that reprocessed product.
Sorry, Matt, more work for you.
Yeah.
We had a couple questions about dates. Is the day needed in the date, or can we just say year, month?
When there is a date that appears on the label, and I'm going to try to back up to that slide, the day is required. So if you have an expiration date that is shown on the label itself, you will need to include that date. Now, many companies have not really tracked that in the past, so they are using the last day of the month as a default. There is a little bit of a discussion, and I don't know if Matt is trying to ask about expressing the date in a particular format inside UDI.
David, it was David, and he actually said YYYYMM.
Yes, right. So David may be referring to the year dash month that is inside the GS1 protocol for expressing the date. Interesting, a little bit of a contradiction where if the date appears as a standalone item, what they call free text, out on the label, expiration of a certain date, then that needs to include the day. When you embed that expiration date in the UDI and the value of the barcode, and you make use of, let's say, the GS1 protocol does not include the day. So of each other, and if he still has the question. But there is that, what appears to be a contradiction between what the FDA is telling industry.
Dan, if you would go ahead and type and share it with the audience. Michelle asks, can you explain what the published date is in the UDI database?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question, and there's a lot of questions about. This is a date that does a couple things. One, it's the day satisfies your responsibility for device to the FDA. Secondly, it marks the transition from on-pub to starts what is referred to. So, life cycle of a data record, you could submit a data record today and have the published date 2 weeks in the future. So between now and those published date, those 2 weeks are referred to as the unpublished time. So you get feedback from the FDA, that it was accepted and so on, but it's really held in limbo in this unpublished scenario. And you can use all fields are published. When the published date occurs, that marks the beginning of a grace period, 30, and only the holder of that record is able to see that data for that period of time. You can make changes to all the fields except the published date, so you can't, play with the published date. And then after that 30, the product automatically closes the period, and then it's fully published, and most importantly, made available on the Access UDI to the public. So there's a couple, during that grace, the FDA, the holder of that data, to make sure that especially those 11 fields that are all of a sudden going to be fixed at the end of that 30 days, to go in and verify those records, those values. So hopefully that answers the question about the published date.
And Michelle also asks, is the AIDC another label versus the current label placed on the product? Can you explain this? It's not the UDI label, it's another label?
Oh, yeah, no, that's a good question. It's really, it's not a new label. It's a form of presentation of the UDI data value itself. So if the, let's say it was the fortunate identifier happened to include a 20 more a serial number, for example. Device in production data would need to be appearing in human readable form, meaning that it's printed out on the label as you know it today. So needs to be embedded into what the FDA C format in that presentation. The effort. But most of the industry has either used a one-dimension or a two-dimension barcode. Technically, you could use like an RFID type of a transmission for that. But the idea is that the FDA wants not only a human to be able to read, but also able to be handled accurately and efficiently through some electronic means. So being able to scan it with them. So it's both of those items, both of those presentations need to appear on your current label.
So Michelle, there are another 2 or 3 questions in the queue here. We'll try to get to them. Just to manage everyone's expectations, it is the top of the hour. We are doing this for 90 minutes today. We are recording it. And for those of you who are joining a medical devices group webinar for the first time, I will have this conversation transcribed for those. We have a question from Dora. Oh, just by the way, too, the question queue goes all the way back 45 minutes now. So if I haven't read your question yet, that doesn't mean I don't have it. Stick around. Dora asks, what if my product is an MDDS device, medical device data systems? Do I need to do this UDI stuff as well? I paraphrase there.
DDS.
Data system.
Oh, right. So there is, it all comes down to whether or not your product is fulfilling the definition of a device and is regulated as a device. So some data systems, and I'm not sure if that's the scenario in this particular case, handle data and store, let's say for the discussion purposes, Fitbit generates a bunch of data about your heart rate and records that data, and it's stored in a data system. If that apparatus is regulated and controlled as a device, then it would need an I would need UDI as long as, again, as long as they're not considered a device.
Just to make sure, if my company resells products from GM regulation, need to worry, at least for now?
Unfortunately, it would
I'm sure you're just not trying to drum up business for yourself.
This is not Gary's answer. This is everything that, all devices that are marketed on, unless there's some exceptions, they have to do with investigated device, the national stockpile and veterinary products and that sort of exceptions. But a broad comment is that these medical devices, if they're commercially sold in the U.S., identifier. So then the question becomes, from a manufacturer responsible. So the question is, who is actually the labeler, and that party then becomes responsible to the German manufacturer is identified on the label. It's probably their identifiers, companies identified, and so on. So in this case, I would say the German company is the labeler, and emitting and distributing that product in the U.S., they would be responsible to comply with UDI.
Sorry, Celine. Just wants to know. Sorry.
Oh, that's a great question. So the an exclusion for existing inventory that is already and labeled and in stock as of the compliance date. There's a 3-year window in which you can take that product, leave it as it is with no UDI, and ship that product out to the marketplace. So yeah, the exception does apply for existing inventory. Now, if you come out with a newly manufactured and it was not fully assembled and a final product, then that. But existing inventory has this nice 3-year window.
Good to know. Thank you. Lisa asks, is there a time frame for submitting new UDI into A-GUDID after the September compliance date for new products? So I have a new product. It's October. I launch immediate.
Yeah, so that's a check marks that needs to be part of your release standard operating procedure. So the FDA does want that device to be in before it's actually outside your control and released to the public. So it is a prerequisite to have that device reported to the to have the UDI before it goes again outside your control. So what we have seen some companies do, by the way, they'll start plans and realize, okay, it's past September, it's a Class 2 product, and I'm not going to bring it out. So they have them to also get you UDI on the product.
But UDI label date the registration.
I'm sorry. What was that question? What was her?
The date of the UDI label date or the manufacturing date.
Well, the options there were manufacturing date and
or just a different date. UDI label.
Product. States that appear on products are many times could be a use by date. I don't believe the registration date is typically put on a label. Now, when I was talking about a pub in the A-GUDID data, that has only visibility as part of that submission to the A-GUDID. Actually on itself. If she was thinking that registration date is what I refer to as the public That's not on the label, and that's the event that we talked about earlier, which is this date that the FDA uses to promote the product from initiates the grace period.
So Ryan follows up. So is this a format for dates? Pardon me. So this is a format for dates, not a mandate for dates on the label beyond current FDA requirements.
Great point. And I neglected to mention that as we walk through. So all those production identifiers to that, even a serial number, a batch number, and so on. The FDA rule says that if you don't have them now on your label, you do not have to add them. So it doesn't require adding those particular elements to your label. But it goes on, the final rule goes on to say, if you are currently using those for production control, and it's on your label, then you do have to flag that information and report that to the FDA.
I'm going to double check for Maya. She thinks you answered her question. She has a multiple use device, a therapeutic laser. It never expires, so she's going to use the manufacturing date, okay?
Got it.
Good. Arena asked, two barcodes, device ID and production ID?
Some companies do break it apart based on the issuing FDA has recognized three global product identifiers that will be able to create the one that is overwhelmingly used, well over 90%, is one. In their protocol, that's something called the G10, the Global Trade Identification Number. And there's a similar standard from HIBIC, which is also available. But in either case, the FDA asks you to go to that issuing agency, basically run them together into one very long string and have a long barcode, or you can have two separate barcodes based on the particular standard that you pick.
Okay. Next, I'm going to ask some of Floyd's questions. Don't need to use the cap lock. It seems very urgent.
Well, I think that's the easiest one so far. Absolutely, yes.
Next, how often lot?
How often do we have to verify the
labels on the containers? His follow-up question is, what is required? What is the required frequency for UDI verification?
Oh, okay, got it. Now I understand this one a little bit better. Again, the issuing agencies talk about the label, and in particular, the GS1 company has a reference to a quality code of B or better. And actual that barcode, in what is referred to as verifying that barcode to make sure it meets that quality, is left up to the manufacturer. So you might put in your design history file a discussion about, well, we have done some studies or we've done some evaluation, and it feels as though at the beginning of our run and at the end of the run is sufficient. You also might another sample that says, oh, well, we check it in end. We'll have a verification process. It's technically possible and an evaluation that the laborer has to conduct on their own as to the frequency of evaluating the quality of the label. And I will make mention at this point that the verifier is a totally different apparatus than a reader. So you might have a barcode reader that interprets the value. In the light area and so on, and comes up with a grade depending on the quality. And it can change based on your printing process, especially the surfaces and the.
I don't know why I'm surprised, but we still have a queue longer than the next 15 minutes will allow. So let's keep going and let's see if we can continue the game of stuff. Deborah asks, for accessories to a medical device, does every accessory, such as dust covers, need to have a good ID?
In that case, the accessory question, it falls back on there is a definition from the FDA regarding accessories, and a general comment is that accessories that are part of the device system would need to have a UDI. It's certainly
Dust cover?
Well, but then the flip side of that coin is let's say that dust cover is not sold separately, then that's a real easy one. You don't need to mark it separately. Attached to a particular box, and it's covering some connectors or something, or a connector and protects it during the shipment. So maybe the other device that is being shipped actually has a UDI on it, and the dust cover is considered a component of that apparatus. So in that case, does not need it. So Joe, and we'll need some more information to
This is exhausting. Seriously. I mean, this is like why I have an account. Now I understand why you've done so many. It's like to establish your good ID account and input the data for the product. It's my understanding, oh, pardon me, I'm sorry, Michelle, I'm having a hard time with this question. Let me come back to it. Manufacturing date also need to appear on the device label?
No, it does not. So that goes back to that original discussion that we had where the label did not originally have the date on it, then there's no reason to add it. So it sounds like there's an internal mapping serial number.
And Ginger, thank you for waiting. For new 510K submissions whose review period encompasses the compliance date, giving a boxed area on the draft label showing where the UDI would go, our client does not yet have established full manufacturing. They're just in design.
Yes, that's thinking ahead. I would time, as part of your 510K application, one would need to identify something called the device identifier. So that would a part of the UDI, but it identifies you as the labeler and also identifies the product and down to the model and version. It's the product, so you have no idea and so on. So that's all production based. So the FDA will not be asking that case space, as suggested in the question, is a great idea.
Lauren, thanks for being patient. She emailed in a question. Do you recommend applying parts that are periodically original hose from the device's UDI?
Well, I figured Joe sooner or later would talk about spare parts and replacement parts.
There you go.
And sure enough, it came up, right?
First time I've asked that question in 8 webinars, is it?
No, it's a very common question, and obviously to figure out the scope of how category of spare parts. And spare parts, replacement parts, if they're going out and put into a finished device, they do not need their own UDI. Once again, just like the tax collector has all these special scenarios, if you market that replacement part as available, then it does need a UDI. So if it's going out, being shipped as a component, if you will, already in the field, replacement, no UDI required. And the significance here is basically placement that does. If a spare part is an enhancement, and for whatever reason significantly causes the safety or the effectiveness, or maybe it's significant enough to be a different model or version, then the issuing of that item and assembling out the whole special. The first straightforward answer here is that spare parts and replacements do not.
To this, and we have 80% of the people who signed on still on. So many questions. Apply medical device that is packaged in multiple containers. Also from Lauren.
We have the let's call this device A. And then the pouch goes into a box, and then the box goes into a shipped out the door to the. So what I was trying to illustrate is that in all those cases, in each of those packaging levels, there is only one, quantity one, product in each of the levels. In that case, the FDA allows you, and actually so you have one bag in one box in one carton. The final label that is shipped out the door, the FDA would like to have that UDI visible and apparent If it's typically a normal procedure to at the carton level, then you only need to have the UDI at the carton level. At the time of use, the carton is discarded, the box is discarded, and the pouch is discarded, and you're now down to the product, and the product has a UDI on it. Then that's all you need. But if it looks like maybe the carton is discarded and the product sits on the shelf as a box, so the time container with the UDI on it. Again, it's always the same UDI when it's quantity 1 and 1 additional. I will mention that some of these scenarios are covered in the guide that we have available. So starting up and learning about device identifiers and working your way through this process. Again, we're kind of talking very quickly through this scenario, but there is some good written material freely downloaded from a website that helps you to understand these scenarios.
Damien asks, with manual entry to FDA, can you cut and paste or records except size, or does all data have to be re-entered every single time?
Well, there is a limited feature. There is a function called copy inside that particular FDA web interface. So you can copy some fields. It requires you to change the ones that have to be changed. So obviously you can't have 2 records with the same device identifier. And that does allow you to do some efficiencies. It does require you to obviously enter master value, if you will, and then make appropriate to those fields that change over the course of time. That comes up is usually there's a contact change to like an email change. As you make edits in the future, you do have to make edits one at a time. So if you have 1,000 and resubmit, as opposed to doing some, you're able to make this 1,000 changes in a bulk fashion and spread it, distribute it across multiple records, and then basically at a push of a button you can submit updates to the FDA. So there are some considerations in initial entry as well as editing in the future.
Speed round. The answer fast enough. We'll squeeze in one more. Is the FDA expecting GTIN for the device ID or the production ID? If a GTIN ID, does the issuing body provide for sterile? Pardon me.
No, in this case, a G10 number is referring to the device identifier. The values that relate to a serial number, a batch number, and so on, they are applied by the labeler to the actual label, product label, but the actual serial number itself is not sent to the FDA. Only the initial device identifier portion is. You will simply need to report the fact that there is a serial number on the product, and that's a Boolean, yes or no, and that's a one-time entry. So every individual serial number, batch number, those actual values are not reported to the FDA UDI.
Okay, last question. Poor Lisa has 20 parts in a package, and she sells hundreds of the kits in different combinations. What does she do?
Well, if it's a, and I guess we don't have time to go into all of that. If there is a individual cells, devices all assembled together, one or more devices, and the FDA has a special exclusion for that where just the kit needs to be identified with UDI and sent along the way. In this particular individual components are ordered independently and just out of convenience, shipped together. She could take identifying those 20 components with individual UDI, all the the thousands of permutations that would result from assembling those individual components. There either way that should be reported in the design history file in case there's.
So, see, Gary, the RETEC folks have graciously opened their headquarter doors to me, and I'm going to host my next marketing and sales workshop there on August 8th and 9th. If you come, you get a twofer, because I'm sure we'll get Gary to sit down in the side room and have some one-on-one time with you. You think you can handle that, Gary?
That sounds great. Sounds great.
Okay. Okay. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, you know him, you love him, Gary Sainer.
Thanks, Joe. This has been another a very effective, great time of interaction, Q&A, and we were glad to help these. And so let's go out and work.
Perhaps the next one we do will be 5 questions.
Right.
Thank you, Gary. Thanks, everyone, for attending. And we will follow up with the slides. We'll have the video out later. Thanks very much. Goodbye from Seattle.